Hi, everyone. So, this is a look at the U.S. Imperialism unit. We'll break this down into two different parts. This time I'm going to be using some images provided by the textbook American Pageant. And here we go. So, the key for America's imperialism standpoint is that the United States expands outside of the continent at the end of the 1800s throughout the early part of the 1900s. And this is really seen often in US history in contrast with European imperialism or European colonialism, even though there's many similarities to the efforts and impacts of America's expansion. So you see, for example, Uncle Sam seated at this table, wondering what will he add to his empire or territory. And President William McKinley, who is president at the beginning of this imperialist phase, taking his order. You see that also one reason for American imperialism was that America had become better allies with Great Britain. Even though there were small spats and disagreements, America and England, two of the biggest military empires of the late 1800s, early 1900s, they have non-aggression pact and much business in common, dating back to after the War of 1812. And so these two nations aren't going to be fighting one another, and therefore they aren't competing with one another the way that some European empires compete and even go to war with one another. So this is, for example, when America acquires Hawaii. Hawaii had been a native country. It was a self-governed country with a monarchy, and American business interests in Hawaii had resulted in eventually more and more military presence, American military presence in the island nation, and eventually even ousting the Hawaiian monarch. So Hawaii is a classic example of early American imperialism. And as America expands throughout the late 1800s into the 1900s, it expands specifically through naval means, right? We're talking to the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean. So in February of 1898, a U.S. warship that is docked in Cuba explodes, and the press, which is results in like sensationalist clickbait style yellow journalism or yellow press, pitches this as a plot by the Spanish government to destroy this boat, and America and American people clamor for war, even though it's not any evidence that Spain has blown up this boat. But the cry of "Remember the Maine" is one reason why in 1898 America declares war on Spain, starting this very short 1-year war with Spain. There is also this idea that America is undoing great injustice around the world by taking colonies of monarchs like Spain and liberating them. And this is a way that America sort of copes with this imperialist phase, is telling itself it's not imperialism, it's not colonization. In fact, this is a good thing to bring democracy to places like Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Hawaii. Um, the war with Spain is very short. America uses its military, which is stationed partly in the U.S. and also some in Hong Kong, and they attack the Spanish forces in the Philippines. There's a very brief battle in Manila Bay, but very shortly after the war begins, Spain's forces surrender to America and surrender the Philippine Islands to America, making the Philippines a U.S. territory. However, many Filipinos had already been fighting for several years against the Spanish colonization effort, and that's why Amelia Aguinaldo and many other Filipinos are angered not just by the colonization of Spain, but what they see as this American betrayal, that America is now colonizing the Philippines. Aguinaldo and other Filipino guerrillas and freedom fighters fight a long guerrilla war against America after America liberates great, quote unquote, liberates the Philippines from Spain. Um, in Cuba and Puerto Rico, the fighting with Spain is also very quick. This is a famous image of then Colonel Teddy Roosevelt before he becomes vice president and then president. With some of his Rough Riders, Roosevelt did volunteer to go to the Caribbean and fight in the war itself. And his march to San Juan Hill and storming of San Juan Hill is something that catapults him into the public light and helps him get elected and win re-election later. Um, in Puerto Rico and Cuba, the battle is also quite short. Within a few months of declaring war against Spain, the Spanish-American War is over, and that leaves America with questions about what will they do with these now territories such as Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. And it's important to know that the Puerto Rican people had almost been entirely native Puerto Rican people have almost entirely eradicated during early colonization under Spanish rule. And so the modern American Puerto Rican heritage is descended from a different group of people than the Taino native group. But Puerto Rican people are American people, and Americans, right? So this is a situation where even though Puerto Rico becomes a territory of the United States, the Puerto Rican people are U.S. citizens. They are denied the right to vote in presidential elections and send congressional. Well, they're allowed to vote in the presidential election, but the presidential votes don't get counted. And they do not have representatives in Congress either. There have been many outcries by different Puerto Rican groups, calls for Puerto Rican independence or Puerto Rican statehood, which is an ongoing issue in America, especially New York. So now that America has acquired these areas, you also have this difficult situation where many Americans at the time don't see Hawaii or the Philippines or Puerto Rico as equals. They don't see a path forward for statehood and citizenship for people from these different territories. There's obviously really racial and other bigoted elements going at play here, but some of this anti-imperialism effort is not simply because these people should have their own country, but because they don't, quote unquote, belong in America. They cannot, quote unquote, assimilate into America. There is also this feeling of jingoism, this feeling of American pride due to this quick and thorough victory over the Spanish Empire. And even though the Spanish-American War itself is very short, like I mentioned, there is a long and bloody battle for independence waged by Filipino revolutionaries that goes into the 1900s, early 1900s. Many Filipinos are American citizens at this time period. Filipinos living in the Philippines will then come to work in the U.S., in Hawaii, for example, and also in the mainland. The classic example here is that there's a very excellent school of medicine and nursing that gets set up in the Philippines. And then when there's a nursing shortage in the United States, many Filipino nurses who speak English and Spanish come to the U.S. for work in the nursing field. So also during this time period, America begins to take interest in opening negotiations and trade with China and putting more pressure on the Chinese empire and monarchy at the time to trade with the United States. This imperialism phase, or what do you want to call it, imperialism trend in America is brief as far as acquiring territories or colonies, but it has deep and long-lasting impacts as America seeing itself as a world power, America expanding and influencing trade and international relations around the world. Teddy Roosevelt becomes president and is often seen as someone who really continues to support American military efforts up until he is unable to become president for a third time. And there's also an effort to expand America's, well, I guess there's an effort for this imperialism to pay off, right? Teddy Roosevelt also negotiates a treaty with Panama, and in order to, well, this is a very complex story here. To be honest, Teddy Roosevelt helps Panama become an independent nation from Colombia so America can build a canal through Panama. Yes, that is a true story. Roosevelt helps engineer a coup d'etat and a revolution against the Colombian government, and helps the Panamanians become independent in exchange for construction of the Panama Canal, and then, of course, temporary U.S. control of the canal zone, which revolutionizes trade through really connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans more directly. This leads to this idea of America having this influence in the Caribbean, really using both its military and economic might to, you can even claim, bully other nations throughout the Caribbean to influence both diplomatic, economic, and political events throughout the Caribbean. And this is where America gets a reputation for having an imperialist mindset in the Caribbean. So I'm going to pause the video here. Let me know what questions you have. I do just want to add, for the historical context, that America's not the only country at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s to expand. So it's not just America as an imperial nation. This is a very critical time period where much of Africa is gobbled up by different European imperial powers. And many Asian countries as well fall, or have already fallen, into colonization efforts by Europe and America, and other empires, like such as Japan is also beginning to become an imperial militaristic nation at this time too. So it's important to note this global connection during the imperialist period, that America and many nations are seeking to expand militarily using their Navy and soon Air Force in order to gain possession and dominance over other nations and people.